Hey guys, welcome back. So dim the lights, pull that blanket up, and maybe put your phone on silent. Tonight, we're drifting into one of those classic mystery zones. The kind of place your uncle might bring up at a barbecue when he runs out of things to say about football. Yeah, it's the Bermuda Triangle. You've probably heard the phrase before. It sounds dramatic, like some swirling whirlpool where planes just nosedive into the sea and ships get gobbled up by Poseidon himself, which is kind of the legend. Except, like most legends, it's about 80% exaggeration, 10% boredom, and 10% people just really bad at map reading. But we're not here for cheap thrills or Discovery Channel jump scares. We're here to take the long, drowsy stroll through how the Bermuda Triangle became the Bermuda Triangle. From old sailors blaming sea monsters to Cold War pilots flying into thunderstorms without checking the forecast, to authors who desperately needed book sales in the 1970s. So let's just float there, gently, into that big triangle of alleged doom between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. A patch of ocean that for most ships is just water, but for some unlucky ones, apparently became their final stop. Now, before we start pointing fingers at aliens, let's remind ourselves the ocean is huge, like aggressively huge. The Atlantic alone is over 40 million square miles, which means if you lose a boat, it's like dropping a Lego in a swimming pool the size of Europe. You're probably not finding it again. And when you don't find something, people love to fill in the blanks with drama. Humans hate boring explanations. Ship sank in a storm doesn't get you book deals. Ship was swallowed by a triangle of supernatural forces? Now that gets you interviews on late-night TV. The thing is, the Bermuda Triangle didn't actually exist as a concept until the 20th century. That's right. Columbus didn't say, "Oh no, my compass went wobbly. We must be in the Bermuda Triangle." That's a retroactive myth. What Columbus did say was that his compass needle seemed off one night in 1492. Which, fair enough, the thing was probably just cheap and badly made. But people loved to twist it. Suddenly, Columbus wasn't confused about magnetic north. He was apparently almost abducted by UFOs. This is how the triangle's reputation begins, with sailors noticing normal things, but writers later making them spooky. Let's talk about Flight 19, because no Bermuda Triangle bedtime story is complete without it. It was December 5th, 1945, just after World War II. 5 Navy planes, TBM Avengers to be precise, went out on a training mission off the Florida coast. They were supposed to fly a simple loop, out east, up north, back home. Easy. But somewhere along the way, the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, got confused. He thought his compasses weren't working and decided they must be over the Florida Keys, which they weren't. They were east of Florida, over open water. Now, you'd hope your flight leader would be good with directions, but Charles Taylor had a bit of a reputation. He was experienced, yes, but also known for, let's say, navigational optimism. That's the polite way of saying he got lost a lot. He had even gotten lost in the Bahamas once before, which is fine if you're on a beach vacation, less fine if you're commanding 5 Navy aircraft. So Flight 19 just kept flying further out, thinking they were heading back in. Radio transcripts show the students were like, sir, shouldn't we, go west? And Taylor basically doubled down, because of course he did. When in doubt, just get more wrong. Eventually, fuel ran low. One by one, those Avengers would have gone into the ocean. A rescue plane was sent, but that one exploded midair because apparently Murphy's Law wanted an encore.
And that's it. 14 men vanished with Flight 19. Another 13 vanished with the rescue plane. And the Bermuda Triangle legend had its crown jewel. Now, if you tell this story fast, it sounds spooky. Planes disappear, no wreckage, all within a mysterious triangle. Cue the dramatic music. But if you say it slowly, like we are right now, you see the reality. It was a confused pilot, bad weather, low fuel, and a very big ocean. No aliens, just human error and bad luck. Which, let's be real, is way scarier than aliens. But Flight 19 wasn't the first disappearance. Long before that, there were ships that sailed into storms and never came out. The sea has always been dangerous. Hurricanes sweep through that part of the Atlantic all the time. And you can imagine being in, say, 1850, with your wooden ship, no GPS, barely a reliable compass, and a crew probably half drunk on rum. If your boat sinks, people aren't shocked. They're just like, well, guess the sea ate 'em. And yet, once writers started collecting these stories in the 20th century, it suddenly became a pattern. And humans love patterns. We're like cats chasing a laser pointer. One book in 1964 by Vincent Gaddis basically invented the Bermuda Triangle as a cultural phenomenon. He called it the deadly Bermuda Triangle because subtlety doesn't sell. He listed a bunch of ships and planes that vanished there, implied it was all spooky, and the public ate it up. Other authors followed. Charles Berlitz in 1974 wrote The Bermuda Triangle, which sold like crazy. Berlitz loved the paranormal. Aliens, Atlantis, lost civilizations. If there was a weird theory, he was on it. And his book made the triangle into a household name. You couldn't go to a bookstore in the 70s without tripping over it. Of course, skeptics pointed out that many of his mysterious cases weren't even mysterious. Some of the ships he listed didn't disappear at all. Others sank in storms with eyewitness reports. But, details. Why let facts ruin a perfectly good bedtime story?
Let's float over to another shipwreck, the USS Cyclops. It was 1918, World War I. The Cyclops was a Navy cargo ship carrying manganese ore. It sailed from Brazil, stopped in Barbados, and then never arrived in Baltimore. Gone. With 309 men aboard, the largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. naval history. Sounds dramatic, and the Bermuda Triangle books love to bring it up. But the reality? The ship was overloaded, one of its engines was busted, it had structural problems, and the captain was, by all accounts, not the most reliable guy. Put all that together, plus rough seas, and yeah, it probably just rolled over and went down. But of course, bad maintenance in heavy cargo doesn't look great on a book cover. So instead, it's The Triangle Ate It. And on the stories go. The Carroll A Deering in 1921. A schooner found abandoned. Crew missing. Spooky, right? Except maybe it was mutiny. Or pirates. Or they just bailed out in a storm. The ocean is full of possibilities. Most of them boring. Here's the secret. The Bermuda Triangle is basically just a normal stretch of sea with a lot of traffic. It's right where ships and planes constantly pass. Miami, Puerto Rico, Bermuda, that's a busy trade zone. If anything's going to go missing, odds are good it'll be there. Just like if you keep your phone in the couch cushions, that's where it'll vanish. Doesn't mean the couch is cursed. But people prefer curses. They're fun. And once the Bermuda Triangle hit pop culture, it became unstoppable. TV shows in the 70s and 80s milked it. Documentaries with ominous music. Could it be aliens? Could it be Atlantis? Could it be the wrath of Poseidon?
Meanwhile, scientists quietly sighed in the background, whispering, "It's just storms and human error." But who listens to scientists? So here we are, rocking gently on the waves of the legend. A triangle that isn't really a triangle, a mystery that isn't really mysterious, but a story. Oh yes, it's a story. And we're only beginning, because we're going to keep drifting deeper and slower through each so-called disappearance, each royal blunder of navigation, each author who couldn't resist adding a little spooky flavor. Let's pause here, breathe, and when you're ready, we'll wander into part 2, where we'll meet more ships that sank, more planes that vanished, and more humans who just weren't great at directions.
Welcome back. Still here? Good. That means either you're committed to the mystery or you've already dozed off and this is floating gently into your subconscious. Either way, let's keep sailing. We left off with the USS Cyclops, which, let's be honest, was less of a mystery ship and more of a floating accident waiting to happen. Tonight, we drift forward into more tales of vanishing boats, wandering aviators, and the authors who made sure these stories never stayed buried. First up, let's talk about the Carroll A. Deering, sometimes called the ghost ship of the Outer Banks, which sounds way spookier than it actually was. So, picture it. January 1921. The Deering was a 5-masted schooner, a big cargo vessel sailing home from the Caribbean. It was last spotted near Cape Lookout, North Carolina. Then, a couple of days later, it washed up on the Diamond Shoals. Completely abandoned, crew gone, food still in the galley, the captain's log missing. Now, if you're trying to write a good ghost story, this is a dream scenario. No bodies, no explanation, just a ship sitting there like someone walked away mid-dinner. Naturally, theories bloomed. Pirates, communist mutiny, rum smugglers, maybe even supernatural forces, because why not? But historians, being the buzzkills they are, dug through the details. The Deering's captain had argued with his crew. The first mate had been arrested for being drunk and disorderly in Barbados. Tensions were high, so mutiny is the boring but likely answer. The crew probably ditched the ship, rowed away, and vanished into the sea. Still sad, but not exactly Atlantis-level weirdness. Of course, this didn't stop Triangle enthusiasts from adding it to the roster of cursed disappearances, because if you're making a list, you want volume. Never mind if some of the cases were hundreds of miles outside the actual triangle. Geography is optional. Let's drift up a few decades to 1948. Commercial aviation was booming. People were finally flying instead of just bobbing around on boats, which meant new opportunities to, well, get lost. That year, a DC-3 passenger plane took off from San Juan, Puerto Rico, headed for Miami. 32 people on board. The weather was fine. The pilot sent a radio message just 50 miles from Miami. And then, nothing. Plane gone, passengers gone, no wreckage found. Spooky? Definitely. But here's what investigators later pointed out. The plane's batteries were faulty, so the radio could have died. The navigation lights weren't reliable either. The pilot was flying at night over the ocean. If he drifted off course even a little, he could have ended up far out over the water. Add in fuel limits and eventually, splash. It's not elegant, but it's plausible. Of course, to the public, plane disappears without a trace sounded way more exciting than mechanical failure plus tired pilot. And so another log was thrown on to the Bermuda Triangle fire.
Well, 2 reasons. 1, more planes in the sky. 2, the Cold War. Paranoia was everywhere. The government was testing weapons, tracking UFOs, whispering about spies. So when a plane disappeared, it wasn't just a sad accident. It was fuel for conspiracy theories. Maybe it was aliens. Maybe it was secret technology. Maybe the Soviets have a giant magnet under the ocean. People's imaginations ran wild. This is the era when flying saucer sightings went mainstream too. You can see how it all blended together. A missing plane wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cosmic clue. And the triangle was the perfect stage. Let's float into another famous case, the Star Tiger. It was January 1948. A British South American Airways plane with 31 people aboard, flying from the Azores to Bermuda. The pilot radioed in, said all was fine, flying at 2,000 feet. Then, silence. The Star Tiger never arrived. Just a year later, in 1949, another of the same airline's planes, the Star Ariel, vanished on a flight from Bermuda to Jamaica. No wreckage, no survivors. 2 losses in sudden succession made headlines. And of course, the Bermuda Triangle crowd loved it. But the investigations suggested some very practical explanations: bad weather, low fuel margins, radio malfunctions. The Star Tiger was flying unusually low, probably to avoid headwinds. At 2,000 feet, if something went wrong, there was no time to recover. The Star Ariel's loss remains less clear, but again, nothing points to magical forces, just the usual mix of human overconfidence and oceanic indifference. Still, when you stack these cases together, it starts to look like a pattern, and humans are addicted to patterns. Speaking of patterns, let's drift back to the 1960s. This is when the Bermuda Triangle really hit its stride as a pop culture phenomenon. Enter Vincent Gaddis. He was a writer who, in 1964, published an article in Argosy magazine. It was basically the Bermuda Triangle's birth certificate. He listed a bunch of missing ships and planes, connected the dots into a triangle, and declared it a mystery zone. People ate it up. 2 years later, he expanded it into a book, Invisible Horizons, True Mysteries of the Sea. And from there, the legend spread like spilled coffee. But Gaddis wasn't even the one who made it huge. That honor goes to Charles Berlitz. Berlitz was a language school heir. Yes, Berlitz, like the language books. He had money, free time, and a love of the paranormal. In 1974, he published The Bermuda Triangle. The book sold millions of copies, translated into dozens of languages. Berlitz suggested everything from UFO abductions to Atlantis technology zapping ships out of existence, because why not triple down? Critics, of course, pointed out that Berlitz fudged details. Sometimes he exaggerated distances. Sometimes he included ships that sank well outside the so-called triangle. Sometimes the mystery ships weren't even mysterious. There were weather records, Coast Guard reports, all ignored. But accuracy was never the point. He was selling vibes, and the vibes were spooky. The public lapped it up. Suddenly, the Bermuda Triangle was on TV shows, in newspapers, and in every kid's paperback collection. By the late 1970s, it was less of a geographic location and more of a cultural meme.
But here's the thing. While the legend grew, so did the skeptics. The U.S. Coast Guard, tired of fielding questions, finally put out a statement. They basically said, look guys, ships and planes disappear everywhere. The triangle isn't special, it just gets more attention. They pointed out that the number of incidents in the Bermuda Triangle isn't higher than anywhere else with heavy traffic. In fact, statistically, it's one of the safer stretches of ocean. Lloyd's of London, the famous insurance market, even confirmed they don't charge higher premiums for ships passing through the Bermuda Triangle. If it were truly cursed, you'd think the actuaries would notice. But nope, business as usual. And in 1975, a journalist named Larry Couchet published The Bermuda Triangle Mystery, Solved. He went case by case, showing how many of the so-called mysteries had simple explanations. Some were storms, some were bad navigation. Some ships never existed in the first place. They were just errors copied from earlier books. Couchet's work was like turning on the lights at a haunted house. Suddenly you see it's just plywood and rubber bats. But of course, debunking doesn't sell as well as mystery. Berlitz's book outsold Couchet's by miles, which tells you everything you need to know about human nature. Let's float back to the ocean itself for a moment, because the geography of the Bermuda Triangle actually explains a lot. First, it's Hurricane Alley. Tropical storms and hurricanes routinely rip through that area. You're a wooden schooner in 1880? Good luck. Second, the Gulf Stream runs right through it. This is a powerful ocean current, moving fast, sweeping debris far away. So if a plane crashes or a ship sinks, wreckage doesn't just sit there. It gets carried off, sometimes never to be seen again. Third, there are deep trenches in the seabed, some over 27,000 feet deep. That's nearly 5 miles straight down. If something sinks there, forget about it. It's not coming back up. Add in magnetic anomalies, which are just natural shifts in the Earth's magnetic field. And yeah, your compass might wobble. Not because aliens are messing with it, but because physics. Put all these factors together, and the Bermuda Triangle isn't mystical at all. It's just a perfect storm of natural challenges, heavy traffic, and human mistakes. Still, the myth endures. Even in the 21st century, the Bermuda Triangle shows up in TV specials, documentaries, and YouTube videos. It's the ultimate blend of spooky and safe. Spooky enough to make you curious, safe enough to know you'll never actually have to deal with it unless you're a pilot. And honestly, maybe that's the charm. We like the idea of a patch of ocean that defies explanation. It's comforting in a weird way, a reminder that even in an age of GPS and satellites, there are still corners of the map where we can project our fears and fantasies. So here we are, floating in that space between myth and reality, with ghost ships on one side, skeptical Coast Guard reports on the other, and between them, the calm, endless ocean. Let's drift gently into part 3, where we'll wander deeper into specific stories. More names, more dates, more unfortunate captains who couldn't read a compass to save their lives, and of course, more authors who turned those mistakes into bestsellers.
So, still awake? Or maybe half asleep, which is honestly the ideal state for this. Perfect, because we're moving from the actual ocean to the cultural one. The Bermuda Triangle didn't just float around as a cluster of accidents, it became a pop culture icon. The kind of thing that shows up in paperback racks, B-movies, and awkward dinner party conversations. By the 1970s, the Bermuda Triangle had basically become a celebrity. Thanks to Charles Berlitz and his 1974 bestseller, everyone was talking about it. People were reading about UFOs snatching planes, Atlantis beams frying compasses, and mysterious fogs swallowing ships whole. It was peak paranormal chic. And of course, Hollywood noticed. Because if there's a way to make money off a scary triangle, you bet someone's writing a screenplay. Take the 1977 film The Bermuda Triangle, a Mexican production that leaned heavily into the supernatural. Ships vanishing, clocks stopping, creepy children predicting doom. It wasn't exactly Oscar material, but it found an audience, especially the kind of audience that also believed in Bigfoot and watched In Search Of on repeat. Speaking of In Search Of, the TV show hosted by Leonard Nimoy, yes, Mr. Spock himself, did a Bermuda Triangle episode in 1977. Nimoy's calm, serious narration over grainy footage of stormy seas, chef's kiss. It was like catnip for the mystery-loving public, because if Spock said it was weird, then clearly it must be worth pondering. But the Triangle's pop culture wave didn't stop there. The 1970s and 1980s were full of Triangle-themed books and documentaries. Kids devoured these paperbacks like candy. Libraries had whole sections that looked like shrines to spooky geography. You had comic books too. Marvel's Fantastic Four sailed into the Bermuda Triangle at one point, naturally, because nothing says family-friendly superhero adventure than getting lost in a mythologized death zone. And then there was the TV movie The Bermuda Depths in 1978. If you've never seen it, picture this: a giant sea turtle, a ghostly woman, and a mysterious undersea realm. Yes, it's as weird as it sounds. And yes, it had a cult following. People who saw it as kids swore it haunted their dreams forever, which is impressive considering the budget was probably less than your average pizza order. Meanwhile, real scientists and Coast Guard officials were probably banging their heads against the wall, because while they were out there explaining currents, storms, and pilot error, pop culture was busy pumping out fog machines and sea monster posters. But here's the thing. People weren't buying triangle stories because they believed them 100%. They were buying them because they were fun. Everyone likes a good mystery, and the Bermuda Triangle became one of those mysteries you didn't have to commit to. You could say, maybe it's aliens, with a wink, and then move on with your life. It was dinner party science, a conversational snack, like talking about horoscopes or that one weird dream you had about your neighbor. Now let's wander back into the actual cases that kept feeding the legend during this time, because while the pop culture machine was cranking, the ocean was still doing its thing, swallowing up the occasional ship or plane as oceans do. One case Triangle writers loved was the disappearance of the Marine Sulfur Queen in 1963. This was a tanker carrying molten sulfur. It left Beaumont, Texas, headed for Virginia, and then silence. Never arrived, 29 men gone. On the surface, very mysterious, but dig deeper and the ship was basically a floating disaster, converted from an old T2 tanker riddled with structural issues. Coast Guard reports before the voyage already flagged it as unsafe. Combine that with rough seas and a cargo that could literally shift and destabilize the vessel, and yeah, not exactly surprising it vanished. Still, molten sulfur tanker sinks because of poor maintenance doesn't make a gripping paperback. So naturally, the Bermuda Triangle crowd claimed it was part of the curse. Another favorite was the disappearance of small pleasure craft and yachts in the region, which honestly happens everywhere. If you put enough hobbyists in tiny boats on a big ocean, some of them are going to disappear, especially if they forget to check the weather, overestimate their skills, or think a six-pack of beer counts as supplies. But writers in the 1970s loved to compile these cases. A yacht gone here, a fishing boat gone there. Stack them together and suddenly it looks like the triangle is gobbling boats left and right. Never mind that most of them were explained by storms, accidents, or people simply not filing float plans. Let's float back to one detail triangle fans love to bring up: compass malfunctions. Columbus allegedly experienced one in 1492. Pilots reported them in the 20th century. The idea was that the triangle messed with navigation equipment, which sounds spooky until you realize the Earth's magnetic field isn't uniform. There are spots where magnetic north and true north line up, called agonic lines. One of those used to pass through the Bermuda Triangle, which means compasses could appear off, when in fact, they were just aligning differently. So yes, Columbus's compass might have wobbled, but it wasn't aliens fiddling with the dial, just magnetism doing magnetism things.
And then there's the weather. We can't say it enough. This is hurricane country. Tropical storms pop up like uninvited dinner guests. Even modern ships and planes get hammered by them. Imagine trying to sail through in 1880 with nothing but a barometer and vibes. If you disappeared, it wasn't mysterious, it was inevitable. In fact, some of the most cited mystery disappearances happened right when storms were documented in the region. But authors conveniently left that part out, because again, boring. And boring doesn't sell. By the late 1980s, the Bermuda Triangle was basically a brand. If you were a TV producer, slapping Bermuda Triangle in your title guaranteed viewers. There were cartoons referencing it, travel brochures joking about it, even board games themed around it. And it hasn't really gone away. Even today, there are new documentaries every few years, usually with ominous music, CGI storm clouds, and some poor narrator forced to say things like, "Could there be an interdimensional vortex beneath the waves?" while scientists roll their eyes. But the funniest thing? With modern technology, satellites, GPS, flight trackers, actual vanishings in the triangle have basically stopped. It's hard for a jumbo jet to vanish in the age of constant surveillance, which means the Bermuda Triangle is mostly fueled by older stories. Nostalgia for a time when you could still vanish mysteriously instead of just having your last ping show up on Google Maps. That hasn't killed the legend, though.
If anything, the less it happens, the more room there is for speculation. The absence of new mysteries keeps the old ones alive, suspended in time. So, here we are, floating in the cultural Bermuda Triangle. One corner is fact, storms, currents, human error. The other corner is fiction, aliens, Atlantis, cursed fog. And the third corner? Nostalgia. A longing for mysteries in a world that feels over-explained. That's what makes the triangle endure. Not because it's real, but because it's fun. Now, let's gently drift toward part 4, where we'll slow down with even more case studies. Ships that left port and never returned. Planes that should have landed but didn't. And the occasional yacht that probably just sank. More sleepy stories, more names and dates, more fuel for a myth that refuses to sink, even if its ships do.